Okay, for this short video then, what we're going to be looking at is the transport systems and how particles actually move around. Some of them in a passive process where there's no energy required, and one where you do require energy. Okay, so first of all we're going to look at diffusion. Now you should be able to give an accurate description of what diffusion is. So really you need to learn this off by heart, because usually it's worth about 2 marks, and you should be able to say, or to just give a really good definition. So diffusion is when something travels from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. And this is just an example here, just to sort of make you understand what diffusion is all about. Let's just say here we've got this hamburger, okay, and it's just been made and it's nice and hot, okay. The particles from that hamburger are really highly concentrated around the hamburger, okay, and then as it's left there, the particles will then start to spread, and eventually they will diffuse because there is a high concentration around the burger, and they will diffuse so that they fill the air to where the low concentration is, so they will move across. Okay, now if we just have a look at that and then apply that to a biological sense, we need to think about cells and why they need to carry out diffusion. Well, cells actually carry out many reactions, and they need a constant supply of some substances, and they need to get rid of others. So dissolved particles, usually molecules and ions, need to get into and out of cells, and the important way they can do that is through diffusion. It's a bit like a slide really. You've got high concentration to low concentration, and you go from high down to low, and it doesn't take any energy. So particles in a gas or in solution constantly move around, and particles tend to move from an area where they're in a high concentration to an area where there's a low concentration down a concentration gradient. The particles move until they are evenly spread out, and this is called diffusion. It's a bit like if you're standing on one side of the room and you spray deodorant, then the people on the other side of the room will not smell the deodorant to start with, but give it a few seconds and the particles from the high concentration by you will spread out into the room, and they will eventually be able to smell it. So when we look at diffusion in cells, many dissolved substances enter and leave the cells by diffusion, including important molecules like oxygen, which is needed for respiration in plants and animal cells. Carbon dioxide also gets into and out of cells by diffusion. Substances can diffuse as gases or as dissolved particles in solutions. To get into a cell, the particles pass through the cell membrane, and the membrane will only allow small molecules through. Well, this is fine for oxygen and carbon dioxide, as they are both small. The process of diffusion does not use energy. You must remember that. No energy required, because the molecules move spontaneously from regions of high concentration to regions of low concentration. Molecules like carbon dioxide and oxygen also diffuse into and out of exchange organs like the leaf in a plant. Also think about your lungs and the alveoli, where the carbon dioxide and oxygen just again carry out diffusion. So the leaves in plants are adapted to increase the rate of diffusion. They are large, for example, so they give a greater surface area over which gases can diffuse. Diffusion also happens because of constant random movement of particles in solution, which are constantly moving. They can move in any direction, but far more particles tend to move from high to low concentrations than the other way, which gives a net movement of particles from high concentration to low down the concentration gradient. However, the rate of diffusion can vary. So factors that can affect the rate of diffusion. First of all, you've got distance. It's quite obvious. The shorter the distance the particles have to move, the quicker the rate of the diffusion. The concentration gradient. If you put more particles there, you are going to have a bigger concentration gradient, so the particles are going to move faster. And lastly, surface area. The greater the surface area the particles have to diffuse across, the quicker the rate of diffusion. Okay, and a good example of that is the lungs of animals and the internal structures of a leaf have a large surface area. Now if we look at osmosis, osmosis is just a special kind of diffusion. It's exactly the same as we've just described. It's the movement from high area of concentration to a low area of concentration, but this time we are talking about water. Okay, so we are not looking at anything else apart from water. Okay, so if you had to give a definition of osmosis, you now would put it is the movement of water molecules from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration across a partially permeable membrane, and you are going to move down the concentration gradient. So you can see here, when we're talking about a partially permeable membrane, we're talking about a cell membrane, for instance. So if we've got water molecules and we've got a sugar solution, you can see here we've got large sugar particles that can't get across that membrane, but we have got small water molecules. And what happens is the water, because there's more water on the left than there is on the right, the water will move into the area where there's less water particles. So the water molecules will move from the left to the right along the concentration gradient and gradually dilute the sugar solution. So this is how water moves into root hair cells, because the water is taken in and then goes up the xylem, and because there's less again in the root hair cells, more will diffuse in. Okay, so here again are some examples. Now this is a really common exam question where they will say to you, okay, we've got a piece of potato which is made up of plant cells and we've put it into pure water. What's going to happen? Well, if you put a piece of potato into pure water, that potato has got sugar molecules in it. So the pure water on the outside will move into the potato and it will make it swell, it will make it become turgid, and it will make it gain mass. If we put a piece of potato into a strong sugar solution, then it means you'll have a lot of sugar particles on the outside of the potato, and you'll probably have a higher concentration of water molecules inside the potato. So the water will try to leave the potato to try and even out the water on the outside, meaning that my potato now is going to become floppy, it's going to become flaccid, because the vacuoles have moved away from the sides of the cell wall and the cell has become plasmolysed. Okay, so we've had diffusion and we've had osmosis. Diffusion is just the movement of particles from high concentration to low concentration. Osmosis is the movement of water molecules from high concentration to low concentration across a partially permeable membrane. The third type of transport we're just going to have a look at is something called active transport. Now this goes against everything we've just said. This is when you are moving against a concentration gradient. Now in this example we're using a root hair cell again, but we're not using water, we're actually looking at the concentration of nitrates. Now this particular root hair cell is going to have a large concentration of nitrates already in it, but it wants more because it's greedy, because it needs those nitrates to help to make amino acids and to make proteins. And so what happens is the nitrates will be pulled in. So a definition for active transport is where you are moving particles from a low concentration to a high concentration. But this time, the most important thing you need to remember is that you need energy. The other two you didn't, because they were called a passive process. This is an active transport and you need energy.